In 1998, a corporate defense lawyer named Robert Bellot lives in Cincinnati with his wife Sarah and their newborn son. Soon after, hoping to look after their son and support her husband, Sarah, who's also a lawyer, resigns from work and dedicates all her time to her family. Meanwhile, after working as an associate at the famous Taft, Stettinius and Hollister law firm for 8 years and impressing his bosses with his hard work and professionalism, Rob gets the recognition he deserves and finally makes partner. A few days later at work, while everyone gathers for a meeting, a senior partner at the firm and Rob's boss, Tom, announces the big news, congratulates Rob, and shows his appreciation for all the work the new partner has put in. Tom then starts the meeting. A few minutes later, a farmer from Parkersburg, West Virginia named Wilbur Tennant arrives at the firm and demands to see Rob immediately, forcing Rob's paralegal Kathleen to interrupt the meeting and call Rob.
They call it a landfill. Dump's what it is.
I'm in the middle of a meeting.
So I want a lawyer. Every damn one in Parkersburg too yellow to take my case.
I am a corporate defense attorney. I defend chemical companies.
Rob politely reiterates that he can't possibly help, wishes Wilbur luck, and returns to his meeting, which he becomes too preoccupied to follow properly, and spends the rest of the hour reflecting on the unusual interaction. As soon as the meeting ends, Rob heads out to a payphone to call his grandmother, but is disappointed when he fails to reach her. That evening, Rob returns home and spends time with his family, but is once again too distracted to enjoy their company. The next morning, Rob drives to Parkersburg to see his grandmother, who warmly welcomes him. Once inside, Rob asks Alma about Wilbur.
Wilbur Tennant?
You do know him.
I used to take you and Beth over there when you were little.
That's the place?
Nostalgic, Rob takes time studying the pictures, completely taken by blissful childhood memories. He then leaves and heads to Wilbur's farm, on his way passing the Washington Works plant, and arrives a few minutes later. Delighted to see Rob, Wilbur gets straight to the point, shares that the landfill has just been fenced following his complaints and inquiries into its content, as if trying to prevent anyone from finding out the answers. Wilbur then introduces Rob to his wife Sandra, and proceeds to show him some of his shocking discoveries.
All turned in on itself. Half my calves born hooks like that. Tumor I done cut off the back of heifer. How'd you like that on your table?
To add to Rob's horror, Wilbur takes him to the back of his farm, which he has been forced to turn into a makeshift graveyard for the 190 cows he lost to the same mysterious condition. This can't be a coincidence. Wilbur then shares that his brother Jim used to dig ditches at the DuPont plant until he fell ill and could no longer handle the work, and adds that DuPont had then offered to buy Jim's land on the other side of the creek, promising never to introduce any chemicals to it. The distraught farmer adds that the EPA had come and compiled a report which everyone has refused to share with him. Totally baffled by the whole situation, Rob drives back home trying to figure out if there really is some truth to the farmer's curious account of the story. The next night, Rob attends a work event with his colleagues.
Please welcome Phil Donnelly. We're not producing chemicals for chemicals' sake, we're producing them for people's sake. Better living is not just a slogan at DuPont.
Later, Rob goes up to Phil and politely talks to him about Wilbur, whom Phil says he's never heard of, and after explaining everything in detail, asks if he can give him the report the EPA compiled, which he hopes will dismiss the farmer's concerns so that he can show it to Wilbur and calm him down. After listening to Rob intently, Phil promises to search for the report and send it as soon as possible, and assures that he will help sort out the matter any way he can. After settling this, Phil, who's genuinely happy for Rob, congratulates him on making partner and offers him a drink. The next day, Rob receives the EPA reports and drives to Wilbur's farm to give them to him, hoping it will settle his worries. However, to his surprise, Wilbur reads the report and becomes furious.
You tell me you recognize my farm.
Mr. Tennant.
Read it. Swallowing whole, whatever they've been feeding you. I can't tell truth from lie. You even watch them tapes I gave you?
Sir, I am trying to help.
Then, suddenly, as if he had just seen a ghost, Wilbur pushes him towards the truck, tells him to hide inside, grabs his weapon, and slowly marches towards her, knowing any swift movement will trigger her. The cow starts aggressively charging at Wilbur, forcing him to shoot her. With his heart breaking, Wilbur goes to check on her, becomes shocked when she once again tries to attack him, and fatally shoots her. Devastated by the seemingly endless nightmare, Wilbur falls to his knees beside his cow and cries his eyes out, deeply regretting what he was forced to do. Shell-shocked shocked by what he witnessed. Rob quietly leaves the truck. Too emotional to even try to comfort the distraught farmer, Rob slowly walks to his car and drives off. Still struggling to comprehend what he had just witnessed, Rob drives around the city, desperately trying to wrap his head around what he had seen, and notices that all the schools and community centers in the city had been built for the community by DuPont, and wonders if it had all been done for show and to give the loyal locals a false sense of security. Overwhelmed by everything, now certain that something ominous is going on, Rob returns home and watches the videotapes Wilbur had given him.
I'm gonna cut her open and find out what caused her to die. This is what her teeth looks like.
Now, more inclined to believe Wilbur and certain that the situation is worth investigating, Rob takes the videotapes to work and shows them to Tom. Seeing Tom's confusion, Rob reiterates the seriousness of the matter. Then, he asks his permission to file a procedural claim against DuPont, which can help them find information on the chemicals dumped at the landfill through legal discovery. Shocked by the request, Tom reminds Rob of their long-standing relationship with DuPont and warns him not to get involved until he assures him that he will only file the claim for the sake of the official paper trail and doesn't want to alienate DuPont. After he gets his boss's permission, Rob assures him that he will handle and settle the whole situation as soon as possible and rushes out to his office. Later, Rob calls Phil, who is surprised by the claim. Relieved to hear this, Phil once again promises to help with whatever Rob needs and adds that he will have his associate send the documents as soon as possible. After waiting for seemingly endless months, one morning in 1999, Rob receives the discovery files, drops everything he's doing, and starts studying them and spends his weekend completely absorbed in them. Soon, in the files, Rob finds several references to something called PFOA, wonders what it stands for, searches the web and industry literature, but fails to find any clue. Putting this aside for the moment, Rob continues going through the documents, discovers that DuPont had used 55-gallon drum steel to transport waste products, becomes baffled, and approaches his colleague Kim for some insight.
Why a requisition order for 55-gallon containers?
They're dumping something in there they don't know is toxic.
The EPA only started regulating chemicals in '76.
Yeah?
Whatever's in that landfill isn't even regulated.
Okay, now you are sounding like a plaintiff's attorney.
Waving this aside, desperate for some clue, Rob asks Kim about PFOA and is disappointed to learn that Kim has never heard of it. With his concerns growing each day, Rob spends the next 2 weeks trying to get in touch with Phil and leaves numerous messages at his office, but is disappointed to get no response. A couple of weeks later, Rob goes to the Ohio Annual Chemical Alliance dinner with Sarah, who tries her best to mingle with his colleagues while he searches for Phil. During dinner, Rob finally spots Phil, approaches him, and, eager to discuss the case, dismisses his apology for not responding to his calls, and, to Phil's surprise, gets straight to his point.
I'm seeing things in your documents I don't understand.
You're on a goddamn fishing expedition.
Phil, I need to insist on broadening discovery.
Sue me!
I'm already suing you.
But why are you this offended, Phil? While embarrassed senior Taft partners watch the scene from their tables, wondering why he would behave this way, Phil curses at Rob and walks away, fuming. Later, Sarah, who is also concerned by her husband's growing obsession with the case, reminds him that the reason she had sacrificed her career was to support him and raise their children, and warns him to think about his future before such reckless moves. This is too much pressure. The next morning, at work, Tom scolds Rob for causing a scene and embarrassing the firm at the prestigious social event, and tries to remind him that the case was supposed to be just a friendly inquiry, done as a favor for a family friend. To his surprise, Rob defends his actions, announces that he will get a court order to force Phil to hand over all of the files, and adds that he will employ the help of a local lawyer from West Virginia named Larry Winter to achieve his plans. A few days after receiving the court order, Phil calls Rob to inform him that he had sent the discovery files, but is soon shocked to receive hundreds of boxes of discovery files spanning decades, which soon fill and take over his office. Realizing that Phil is trying to overwhelm him, and now certain that there is something DuPont is trying to hide, Rob buries himself in the files, going through each page with a fine-tooth comb, and finds more references to PFOA, which is also known as C8. Desperate to learn what it is, Rob meets with a chemical expert named Dr. Gillespie to ask him about it, but is disappointed to learn that the doctor has also also never heard of it. Then, just when he's about to give up, the doctor suddenly remembers reading about a related chemical group and shares what he knows.
Well, a chain like that's pretty much unbreakable. That's like saying, what if I swallowed a tire? I don't know. 3M made it. They don't anymore. That's what I read.
This is ominous. Meanwhile, in Parkersburg, Wilbur goes to his regular local diner with his friend, where he notices everyone staring at him, including the owner, who treats them with hostility. Just as the duo wonders what's going on, they read a local news article that portrays Wilbur as a disgruntled employee. However, this only gets worse as time goes by, and the tenants soon become shunned by their own community, who openly blame them for biting the large hands that feed them. One Sunday afternoon in 2000, while absent-mindedly playing with his now toddler son, Rob suddenly remembers seeing young children with darkened black teeth in Parkersburg, suddenly realizes something, and calls Dr. Gillespie.
That chemical, you said it had a fluoride add out of it. What would it do to your teeth?
Well, in trace amounts, fluoride hardens teeth, but too much, it's going to stain them.
Rob runs out to his office, goes through the documents, and just like he suspected, finds reports showing the detection of C8 in public water systems in West Virginia. A few days later in Parkersburg, as Wilbur's chronic cough gets worse, Sandra takes him to the hospital where he gets some tests done. Then, the tenants return to their farm and are shocked to find their house ransacked, as if someone had broken in and was searching for something. Suspecting that DuPont had something to do with this, Wilbur quickly checks on his evidence files and videotapes, is relieved to find them, and hides them. To make matters worse, moments later, the tenants hear strange sounds outside and run out to see what's going on. That night, despite not feeling well, determined to protect his family at all costs, Wilbur sleeps outside in his truck with his weapon in hand. So courageous. Meanwhile, Rob works late at the office, going through the discovery file, notices something disturbing, and spends hours cross-checking files and confirms his suspicions. Terrified, Rob rushes back home in the middle of the night, where he causes a ruckus and wakes his pregnant wife. Scared for her life, Sarah cautiously walks to the kitchen, becomes shocked to see her husband acting like a madman, and lashes out. Suddenly realizing what he had just done, Rob tries to apologize to Sarah, who wants to hear none of it, and scolds him for his obsessiveness with the DuPont case, neglecting his family and risking his future. Rob profusely apologizes, calms Sarah down, and after convincing her to give him a chance to explain, he shares his discovery, which shocks her to her core.
DuPont is knowingly poisoning us. They're already poisoning the baby. There is a man-made chemical. So they used it to make the first ever waterproof coating for tanks. So they took this chemical, PFOA. They called it Teflon, a shining symbol of American ingenuity.
This is just a lot worse than I could have imagined. As a horrified Sarah remains frozen with fear and listens on with sheer terror, Rob adds that DuPont had discovered C8's toxicity since 1962, a year after Teflon's discovery, and yet released the sludges into the Ohio River or packed it into steel drums and dumped it. However, a few years later, the drums had started washing up, and so DuPont had hired local men like Jim to dig ditches on the Washington Works plant, in which they dumped thousands of tons of toxic C8 sludge and dust. Rob also discovers that a company called 3M, which had pioneered the use of these chemicals, had run tests on monkeys, most of which died. Shocked by these results, DuPont had taken all young women off the Teflon production line, without telling them the reason. Unfortunately, a pregnant woman named Sue Bailey, who had been tasked with scrubbing the steel vats containing liquid C8, had given birth to a baby with one nostril and a deformed eye. Assured Sue that it didn't have anything to do with her job, erased all her records from the company's file, and had put all the women back on the Teflon production line, without disclosing any of their discoveries to anyone. As Rob goes deeper into the horrific rabbit hole of discoveries, overwhelmed by everything he discovers, which he shares with Tom, Rob invites Phil to the office, shares everything he learned, and confronts him.
Knowing all of this, still you did nothing because you're making too much money. Millions more pounds of toxic C8 into the air.
Do you not have anything to say, Phil? Later, Rob goes to the tenant farm to see Wilbur, tells him everything, and explains that DuPont had known that Jim was sick from exposure to the chemicals. Rob then urges Wilbur to take his family, move away from the toxicity, and start over elsewhere. However, to his sheer shock, Wilbur remarks that it's too late for such hope and reveals that both he and his wife have been diagnosed with cancer.
Ugh!
It just keeps getting worse. Shocked, speechless, Rob stares blankly at Wilbur, quietly walks back to his car, and drives away to his home. Once here, a heartbroken Rob breaks down and cries his eyes out until Sarah calms him down.
Or he lets DuPont just keep pillaging his community. How's that helping? Have you read their confidentiality agreements? It's all I know is lawyering.
Fine. Then be the lawyer.
Rob gets back up and spends the whole night drafting a memo to the EPA, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Health and Human Services. The next morning, Rob goes to the office and hands the memo along with more than 100 exhibits of internal DuPont files to Kathleen so that she can make copies and send them out. Later, Rob invites Wilbur and Sandra to the office, where he introduces them to Phil and mediates a settlement for them. Seemingly anguished to see the ailing couple, Phil agrees to the deal and quickly signs the necessary documents. At the end of the meeting, sympathizing with the tenants, Phil gets up to offer them a handshake, but the exhausted couple disregard it and walk out without saying a word or looking at him. We are way past handshakes now, Phil. A couple of days later, after reviewing the documents, the EPA announces a hearing into C8 and related groups of chemicals in Washington and calls Rob to testify. Phil finds this out and tries everything he can to stop Rob from testifying. Unfazed by all this, Rob goes to Washington, testifies about the toxicity of C8, and urges the EPA to take action. A few days later in Parkersburg, a couple named Joe and Darlene Kiger are confused to receive a letter.
PFOA is a persistent chemical that DuPont has advised the district that it is confident these levels are safe.
In 2001, Rob and Sarah go to the Kiger's house to speak to them and are received warmly. Darlene narrates that her first husband was a chemist at DuPont, where he was paid very well. She adds that she had always found it curious that DuPont went out of its way to retain the chemist and even got them expensive gifts, numerous times a year for no reason. Knowing full well that DuPont had forged the letter and sent it to the Kigers, Rob fumes on behalf of the victims at the extent of DuPont's treachery, but soon calms down and starts preparing for the case. A few days later, with Tom by his side, Rob meets with the partners of the firm and presents the case, hoping to convince them to get on board and allow him to take up a class action.
I mean, as far as EPA is concerned, it might as well be rose petals.
Seems to me that they're being a good corporate citizen here.
C8 bioaccumulates. It builds up inside of us.
After listening to this intently, one of the partners, James, lashes out at Rob, accusing him of taking advantage of the chemical industry, which he has served for years, and using what he knows to attack and hurt it. Luckily, Tom steps in to stop James and reminds everyone that DuPont is knowingly endangering the lives of many and reiterates no one should turn a blind eye. Rob then acquires the services of a class action lawyer from West Virginia named Harry Deitzler and opens a class action suit against DuPont, which the conglomerate soon files a motion to dismiss. A few days later, Rob, Larry, and Harry go to court to contest this motion, and Rob runs into Wilbur, who is now bound to a wheelchair, and greets him. Struggling to catch his breath, Wilbur asks Rob to never let DuPont get away with what he had done and wishes him luck. A few minutes later during the hearing, to Rob's shock and contrary to its earlier studies, DuPont shares that the West Virginia C8 working group had just announced that C8 levels of 150 parts per billion are safe, produces an expert to explain this finding, and tries to get the case thrown out. However, Harry expertly questions this claim, forcing the witness to reveal that DuPont is a stakeholder in the working group and successfully casts doubt on the reliability of anything it produces. Hence, the judge throws out DuPont's motion. Soon, details of the class action spread, and residents of Parkersburg protest, demanding clean water, while Harry shares his delight over the judge's decision and begins preparing for it. In 2003, global hysteria ensues as more people become aware of Teflon and the risks associated with it, forcing the EPA to open a priority review of C8. One quiet evening in Parkersburg, Joe's father's house goes up in flames, and Joe, who lives across the street from his father, sees it. Terrified out of his mind, Joe rushes over, tries to put it out, and calls for help. Later, once the fire is controlled, despite the major damage, Joe is relieved to hear that no one was inside the house during the incident and breathes a sigh of relief. In 2004, Rob goes to Delaware for a deposition.
DuPont believes there is no evidence that PFOA causes any. You see the date, March 13th, 1979. DuPont refers to the men and women that your company exposed to C8 as receptors. You see that heading? You see that date? You see that? Exhibit 96.
I'm not aware of a study by 3M.
How about DuPont's own studies that showed the same thing in humans?
Later, Rob leaves the emotionally charged deposition, heads to his car, but soon notices that his hand is numb and shaky. Attributing it to his nerves, Rob proceeds to start his car but struggles, and it takes him numerous tries just to get his car started and drive home. A few days later, after finishing its review, the EPA charges DuPont $16.6 million for not disclosing the health risks of C8. That's like a slap on the wrist. A couple of weeks later, a mediation is held between DuPont and Rob's team, who represents the class action.
If the science panel fails to establish probable scientific links, then this case is over. DuPont will pay $70 million in cash to the class.
3 days revenue on the Teflon line.
Afterwards, Rob and his team go out for drinks, and Harry shares his concern that since the locals don't trust them and even still blame them for suing their employer, they won't volunteer for the tests. Then, after a few minutes of discussion, Rob reminds his team how vital the results of the panel will be, and suggests giving the locals their money only after they give the blood samples to ensure they can get as many volunteers as possible. Hence, in 2006, on the day of the sample collection, which has become the talk of the city, Rob goes to Parkersburg and is delighted to see thousands of people waiting to give their blood samples. A few minutes later, Harry informs Rob that his plan has worked perfectly, and the locals are eager to get the $400 promised to them after the blood draw. Hence, they showed up with their families and friends, without much hustle. Harry then takes Rob around to show him the setups and introduces him to a local woman named Luann, who has shown up for the test with her young kids. As soon as she sees Rob, Luann shares that she had volunteered for the test so that she can get the money, which will come in handy for the upcoming holiday season. A few days later, while celebrating Christmas with his family, Rob is delighted to learn that 69,000 samples have been collected and celebrates the great news with Sarah. In 2009, Rob is devastated to learn of Wilbur's death, goes to Parkersburg to attend his funeral with Sarah and his 3 sons, and pays his respects. As he sees Sandra, who is now bound to a wheelchair, mourning her beloved husband, Rob quietly breaks down, thinking about the brave farmer, whom he desperately wished would have lived long enough to see the fruit of the life-changing fight he had courageously started. Later, while having lunch at a diner with his family, Rob is approached by a distraught young man who informs him that his brother had just passed away from testicular cancer, leaving 3 young children, and lashes out at him, demanding to know why the results of the blood tests haven't been released yet. A few days later, while running some errands, Darlene is harassed by the locals and rushes home. Enraged by this, Joe calls Rob, shares the situation, and pleads with him to get the results as fast as possible. Feeling cornered, Rob calls the science panel's office and politely asks why the results are taking this long. Despite understanding Rob's valid concerns, the assistant explains that since the sample size is large and needs to be run through complex tests, the results are still in progress. One morning in 2010, Rob joins his family for breakfast and watches on absent-mindedly as Sarah packs the kids' lunch and prepares to take them to school, and wonders how he can manage to keep supporting his family financially when he has no paying clients, and all he does is wait on the DuPont case.
Can you still afford it? Catholic school, for God.
Because it's not about your case, Rob. Say something for God's sakes, Rob.
No.
This is costing you too much, Rob. One afternoon, in 2011, Tom, who is one of the few people who still supports Rob, calls him to his office to discuss the case and its ongoing cost that seems to be bleeding the firm dry.
Tom, our government is captive to DuPont. They know that, and they're trying to make it as expensive as they can to force you to make me stop.
I'm sorry, but you're going to have to take another pay cut.
Tom, that's
Clients, no one will take your calls.
Suddenly, Rob falls to the ground, starts seizing uncontrollably, and soon passes out. Terrified out of his mind, Tom calls for help, and Rob is rushed to the hospital. After hearing the shocking incident, Sarah rushes to the hospital and sits outside Rob's room, praying with all her heart that her husband can pull through this. After hours of testing, the doctor explains to Sarah and Tom that Rob had something similar to a stroke, but luckily will make a full recovery. Paranoid by everything that's been going on around her, and fearing that someone may be trying to silence her husband, Sarah asks the doctor to run a full toxic panel. Sympathizing with the panicked Sarah, the doctor assures her that his symptoms had nothing to do with such an attack, are completely neurological, and were probably caused by stress. She then advises that Rob should look after himself, take enough rest, and manage his stress levels. Then, relieved by the overall promising prognosis, Tom proceeds to leave, bids farewell to Sarah, and assures her that she can call him at any time.
Don't talk to me like I'm the wife. It's not just a job. To him, it's home. You and I may not know what that is, but it's not failure.
Luckily, Rob soon regains consciousness and within a few days makes a full recovery and is released from the hospital. One afternoon in 2012, while driving around trying to clear his head and silence the million questions running through his mind, Rob runs into a now adult Bucky at a gas station and becomes overwhelmed. Totally crushed by guilt, confusion, and helplessness, Rob drives back to his office and just sits there for hours, staring into nothing, until he receives a call from one of his colleagues working on the case about unpaid checks and overdue bills. Frustrated, knowing that he doesn't have the money to pay for anything and can barely afford to run his own life, Rob quietly hangs up the phone. Seconds later, his phone rings once more and Rob proceeds to disconnect it, suspecting that it's his colleague calling him back. However, just at the last ring, he changes his mind, picks up the call, and is stunned to discover it's the call he and the thousands of victims have been waiting for years.
Thanks to you, the entire class will be monitored. 3,535 people in the class already have these diseases.
As if a huge weight that had been crushing him for as long as he can remember had just been lifted off his shoulders, Rob breathes a sigh of relief for the first time in years, goes home to share the news with Sarah, and cries his eyes out in sheer joy. A couple of days later, Rob takes his family out to dinner to celebrate the monumental news, and to Sarah's delight, they enjoy themselves. However, a couple of hours later, Rob receives a call and is devastated to learn that DuPont has reneged on the deal they made, rejected the findings of the science panel, refused to pay the money, and is preparing to fight each of the thousands of cases in court, which he knows the sick and terrified victims can't handle.
On day one, he knew. And I thought he was crazy. They want to show the world it's no use fighting. Not the companies, not the scientists, not the government, us.
Ugh. The roller coaster of emotions. As a result of DuPont's actions, Rob becomes frustrated and utterly devastated. In the coming few weeks, after reflecting on everything that happened since the day Wilbur had walked into his office, despite the never-ending obstacles and DuPont's shameless tactics, Rob decides that he must remain strong for the sake of the victims, whose only crime seems to have been living in Parkersburg, West Virginia. He reminds himself that someone must put a stop to the endless nightmare once and for all, and continues studying the details of the case, compiling the evidence and preparing for the trial. In 2015, in Columbus, Ohio, Rob appears before court on behalf of the plaintiffs and prepares to present the case.
Oh, still here, huh?
Still here.
Rob wins a jury award of $1.6 million in the first of these cases, $5.6 million in the second, and $12.5 million in the third. Terrified by this, DuPont finally decides to settle all 3,553 cases for $670.7 million. Unfortunately, PFOA is believed to be in the blood of every living creature on the planet, including 99% of humans. Now, as a result of Rob's work, today, decades after he first took Wilbur's case, Rob still fights for positive changes.